I wish I could tell you I have vivid memories from Master's visit in '63, but unfortunately I was only 2 years old then and have no conscious memories of that time. However, I do have quite a few memories of the ashram starting about 1965, when I was 4, which also happens to be the year that I was initiated into the sound current. And I remember Master sitting at the kitchen table of our little house, making a phone call to India to talk to Taiji. I remember how surprised I was to see him talk on the phone like a regular person, and how great it was to have him in our house. I also went to Washington, D.C. on that tour, and my strongest memories from D.C. are of the informal darshans that sometimes occurred in the evenings in Master's room. I think this was at Mr. Khanna's house. And I remember Master being very jolly on these occasions, and he would often give out prasad. One evening he was handing out some especially tasty prasad. I think it was some type of cake. He definitely sometimes gave out cake. There were various celebrations that were occurring, and there was a lot of cake around. And I remember sitting right in the front. I was one of the first people he gave prasad to, and I ate it right up as he was going around to the others in the room. He then came back to the front, and he offered me another piece. I thought he might not have realized he'd already given me a piece, so I explained to him that he'd already given me some. He laughed and said, "Oh well, have some more," as he gave me another piece. I remember thinking how much I liked how Sant Mat works. Yeah.
When Eric was talking, it reminded me of something that happened on the tour in '72. Before Master came, I had given my sister a little wallet picture of the Master, and it was very dear to her, but she lost it. And she looked all over the house for it, and looked everywhere and couldn't find it. And then Master came on tour, and she came to see him. She was staying in Vermont. She drove over to see him one night, and she said later that, she said, I don't think I ever want a guru. She said this to my mother, but if I did, I'd want Johnny's, because he just stopped in the middle of everything and looked at me in a way that nobody else could. And then he smiled in a way that nobody else ever smiled before. Sorry. Anyway, so she went back to Vermont that night, went to sleep, and woke up in the morning, and the picture was right on her pillow, right next to where she was sleeping. It was a larger than usual satsang. It was Baba Sawan Singh's Bandara in the summer. We were in Delhi. The estimates were at 5,000. Right down there I was, a dot in a sea of humanity, a speck of dust in an ocean of love. And Master spoke to the large gathering in Hindi, and I sat there, sometimes imbibing the love, sometimes just trying not to move around too much. And suddenly, my heart welled up, my eyes filled with tears, and this thought struck my heart. I was thinking, I know, Master, you say you never leave us, but Master, I forget you all the time. Does the Master forget the disciple? And immediately, in this huge crowd, Master looked up, and in clear, beautiful English, he said, the disciple can forget the Master, but the Master never forgets the disciple. And then just went back to talking in Hindi, giving the rest of the satsang in Hindi.
Well, the first thing he said to me in '69 when I got there, he asked me how everyone was over here. And I told him they were okay, and so this and that, whatever I said. And he said, if those people over there knew how much love I had for them, they'd be dancing all around. They'd be dancing. He repeated that. And that really is the case of it. You know, the Master has so much love for us. And if, you know, sometimes it's hard. There have been times when I have absolutely, totally prevented myself from seeing that. But That love is the basic stratum of the universe, and it's there between the Master and us. Thank God.
I don't have any faith in anything in this world. I can honestly say that all my faith, I put all my capital, I like that word, I put all my capital in my Master. I don't have any hopes for anything else, because things can get very dark. We can all suffer in unbelievable ways, but that is not even a test. That's just the karmas. And the Master will be with us in eternity. There's absolutely no question in my mind about that. I have no real idea of the Master, but I have a great deal of faith. And I also would like to say that I am happier now with my Master, my family, and myself than I have ever been before. So this is a path of progress. It's not a path of perfection. And the big thing that I would share with all my brothers and sisters is, thy will be done, not my will, on a day-to-day basis.
And then one day, case in hand, I went to the Master, brought this case to him, and I had this anticipation of him. Before I went there, I had this anticipation of him sitting up straight and looking at me very sternly and saying, "Look here, you people need to tell me these things. Otherwise, how could I set them right?" So, like almost every time I had an expectation of what the Master would do, I couldn't have been more wrong. So I said what I had to say, and Master patiently listened to me, very patiently. Sometimes almost he agreed with me, but I remember very little of what he said. Because at some level, you can call it mental level or telepathic, whatever you want to call it, but this was so much more clear than anything he said. And what he said to me, it was the last thing I expected. And I'll never forget that. He said, "I know everything you're telling me," he said, "and I still love her." I think back to that day, to that time, and how many years have passed since then. And one thing I know with absolute certainty is that the mistakes I've made on this path are different than hers, but they are no way less than hers. But because of that love that he has for all of us, he's been able to love and forgive me. So who couldn't be thankful to a Master like that? How often we talk about how peaceful it is being in the Master's presence, and it is peaceful. But sometimes when you're with the Master, it would feel like you just stepped into a hurricane. And Master's hurricane isn't the wind and rain kind of hurricane or confusion and troubles. I always think of Master's hurricane as like a hurricane of torrential love and wild and crazy happiness and a deep, deep fulfillment of the soul. And I think that's the best story of all.
Susan asked me if I had a short memory of something. I guess the most spectacular memory for me was we were late and I came running up the hill, the little tiny hill up to the rock, and I was making a lot of noise getting up there. I suddenly saw everyone in meditation, very, very silent, and Master sitting on the rock looking like the king he was, the God King he was. And, just falling on my knees and trying to go into meditation and going into meditation. And I don't know how long he had had everyone in meditation, but after what seemed like a very, very long time, I suddenly heard him and all the people coming toward me. I heard it very clearly. And I was very freaked out that I was blocking the path. I thought I was blocking the whole path, and that Master was waiting for me to move so that they could get by. And I opened my eyes to get up and get out of the way. And everyone was still there, and Master was looking at me very directly, and he looked at me for what seemed like about 30 or 40 minutes, and I knew you weren't supposed to look away from Master's eyes. And it was the most spectacular thing to this day that's ever happened to me, period, in any way, even with Master. They don't, quote unquote, they don't do magic, but this was clearly magic, that I had heard these people struggling to get over and get me out of their way, and then he gave me that darshan. One day we were at the far end of the hall, the old hall. This was in 72, and I remember this is the only thing that got me through Master's passing when he left the body in 1974, this memory. We've been in meditation. Master would ask, what did you, he would say, who saw such and such? And then we would tentatively raise our hands or not. And he would always say, hands up, don't be afraid, nothing to be ashamed of, hands up. So we were doing that, and he was sitting on the same level as us, which was very sweet. Then finally he got up to who saw the Master within, and one brother said, well, I don't know if it was it wasn't you. You mean you? It wasn't you, but it was the Master, but it was. And he said, what did you see? And he was very direct that way. And he said, well, it was Baba Sawan Singh. And Master said this incredibly touching thing. He said, did he have any word for me? Did he say I may leave soon? And since I can't talk anymore, I'll just stop there.
You are a jewel of Sawan, O Kripalji. You are the owner of the whole world. We have come to your court. Fill up the empty joli.
Sawan datu laleji kire paleji sare jagge datu vali. Ai tere darembareji joli bardeo kali. Sawan datu laleji kire paleji sare jagge datu vali. Ai tere dare bareji joli bardeo kali. Mere jayan tenu lakna to hazaran. Mevitane kadi sate guru tenu pukarana. Mere jayan tenu lakna to hazaran.
We all left around noontime for Kripal Ashram in Vermont, managed by Nina Jatana. On the way out, an incident occurred which none of us, except the Master, were remotely aware of at the time. Yet it is an excellent example of how the Master works. We think we understand what he is doing. We include him in our mental catalogs of categories we are familiar with. Yet the truth is we see only the barest sliver of what he is and what his activities include. The following is an article written by Charlene Girouard and published in the August 1993 issue of Sant Bani magazine. And this was Charlene's account, written 30 years after the fact. The year was 1963, the month October. I was 12 years old. And I have to tell you, it is extremely difficult for me to read this without crying, even though I've read it 100 times. I was 12 years old, living with my family in Massachusetts. My oldest sister was going to a Catholic boarding school in Hudson, New Hampshire, about an hour's drive from Franklin. One Sunday, our whole family drove over to visit her. After leaving the rest of the family at the boarding school, my dad decided to go for a drive in the country, so I went along with him. Dad loved to ride up and down the winding dirt roads, which were quite common in that part of the country, to see what was at the end. On this particular day, we had gone some distance down a road when my father slowed to a stop to let 4 or 5 cars coming down a steep dirt driveway drive past us. While we watched, a man in the back seat of the first car leaned forward with his hands folded and bowed slightly to my father, while staring at him quite penetratingly and very seriously. He had a white beard and a white turban and deep-set eyes. I was in the back seat and had seen him, but he had not looked at me. I zoomed over to the other side of the car, and with my face pressed against the glass window, just hoped for some reason, I didn't understand why, with all my heart that this man would look at me too. Just when it seemed the moment had been lost, he leaned forward and with folded hands looked at me. Very sadly, I thought in my 12-year-old mind, why is he so sad? But then I felt a sense of relief. He had looked at me. Somehow this was very important. Well, Dad and I decided to go up this driveway and investigate. A turban and a white beard in New Hampshire. At the top was a wood frame house. A sign read Sant Bani Farm. Being Catholic and my father being French, I thought maybe it was a farm for men studying to be priests and dedicated to the Catholic Saint Boniface in French. My father shrugged his shoulders and we drove back to the boarding school, picked up the rest of the family and drove home. Over the years, I forgot about the incident, although the picture of that man with the long white beard always intrigued me. A few years before my dad passed away in 1986, he started mentioning this incident to me from time to time, but with some embarrassment. He was a strict Catholic. Around this time, he would occasionally complain to me of a ringing in his right ear. Since I had taken some nursing training and he was a dentist, we would try to figure out the cause. I don't know if he mentioned it to the other members of the family. Sometimes we would just be sitting together eating and this ringing would start in his ear. He found it quite annoying. A few months before my father passed away, which was quite suddenly at home of a heart attack, we were sitting at the table and he asked me bashfully if I remembered that strange man in the white beard, referring to that fateful encounter in 1963. He told me that he was having dreams about him that seemed so real. We both wondered who he had been. As he was telling me about the dreams, I could tell he was disturbed, but somehow happy about them. Well, we just looked at each other and wondered what it was all about. After my father died, I dreamt about him 3 or 4 different times. In the last dream, he told me he was doing great and that he was on his way to New Jerusalem. It was a phrase he had never used while alive, and I was not familiar with it until a couple of months before my initiation in 1989, when I found reference to it in Sant Kripal's book, Nam. Meanwhile, a satsangi was working where I was employed, and I felt quite drawn to her. Well, one thing led to another. She lent me a book on Sant Mat. I asked her for another. I bought 2 more of my own. At first, I was not at all interested in Sanchi. By then, I had remembered vividly the incident with Master Kripal in 1963 and recognized his face from the pictures in the Sant Mat books I was reading. I realized that my father was safe. He was with Kripal. As I sat reading these books and looking at the pictures of Sanchi, I was drawn to those eyes, although if anyone had told me even a few months earlier that I was going to have a master, I would have laughed. But Sanchi had his way and has his ways. I fell in love with him. A few trips to the ashram in Surrey, British Columbia, a few satsangs and a few weeks of his eyes, and I wanted initiation, which came that summer. We think we understand what the Master is doing, who he is, what he's all about. We think we understand, how God works in the world, etc. We may consciously not think we understand, but the way we work assumes that we do, always. And the fact is that we know nothing. Now, 2 things are happening. Master was here, and I thought I understood. I mean, he made an ashram. He changed my life. He changed Judith's life. Although Miriam and Eric didn't know it, he changed their lives. He started all sorts of things going, which continued to roll on like a big snowball. But there were things that I had no idea that he was doing, one of which was the thing with Charlene and her father, which I only found out 30 years later. How the Master works, what he does, is totally beyond us. It is, we deal with it as best we can. We have our assumptions, we have our preconceptions, we do our best with those. The fact is that we only see glimpses and shadows and half images of that which is real. And that's what, we go along, we assume this, we assume that, we think we know what the path is, we think we know what it's all about. We don't know anything. Whatever we know is just the slightest inkling of what there is to know. And the longer I live and the more I walk on the path, the more that becomes clear to me. ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰੂਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਸਦਾ ਨੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੀਆਂ ਜਦ ਕੇ ਜਹਾਨ ਸਭ ਨੇ ਤੁਰ ਜਾਣਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਹੈ ਘਰ ਹੁਣ ਹੋਇਆ ਬੇਗਾਨਾ ਆਪਣੇ ਬਾਸ ਜੇ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਜੁਦਿਆ ਕਾਨੂੰ ਸਹਿੰਦੀਆਂ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰੂਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਸਦਾ ਨੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੀਆਂ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰੂਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਸਦਾ ਨੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੀਆਂ ਲਾ